When does the line between soldier and police officer not just blur, but fundamentally shift? And what does that mean for, well, the very fabric of our republic? Today, September 2nd, 2025, we saw a really significant ruling on this. A federal judge in California, Judge Charles Breyer, well, he made a big call.
Yeah, a really big one.
He found President Donald Trump violated military law. This was by activating, thousands of National Guard members and deploying Marines for immigration raids right there in California.
And importantly, against the wishes of the state's governor, Gavin Newsom.
Exactly, despite Newsom's strong objections.
Yeah.
And this ruling, it lands just as the administration is actually planning similar National Guard moves in 19 other states.
Right, starting now August through mid-November.
Targeting immigration and crime specifically. And Texas looks like it's going to see the biggest presence, right?
That's the projection, yeah. A significant deployment.
So at the absolute heart of all this legal and political heat is the Posse Comitatus Act. It's, 147 years old?
That's right, 1878.
And it was specifically designed to stop the military from acting like a domestic police force. Yet we're hearing these really urgent calls, louder and louder it seems, to expand the military's role. Why? Well, because of what many are calling rapidly deteriorating conditions at the U.S. border.
And the numbers are pretty stark when you look at them.
They really are. We're talking over 100,000 overdose deaths each year from fentanyl since 2021.
A devastating number.
And then on top of that, a staggering 8.5 million border encounters just between 2021 and 2023.
Right. So for a lot of people looking at those figures, they're saying an enhanced military role isn't just an option.
It's essential. Crucial for national security is the argument.
Precisely.
So our mission today is to really dig into this. We want to unpack the legal side, the history, the practical stuff around the military's role here at home, especially, looking at border security and domestic law enforcement.
And we'll be drawing on insights from various think tanks, Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, plus, of course, this breaking news out of California.
Trying to understand that tension, right, between security and liberty. Okay, so let's start that foundation. The Posse Comitatus Act. 147 years old. What exactly does it do? Why was it even created back then?
Well, the act passed in 1878, like you said. It generally forbids federal law enforcement from using the U.S. military to, and this is the key phrase, execute the laws.
Okay, execute the laws.
Right. The core idea, and a federal court actually explained this pretty well, is that military folks are trained for combat. Warfare. They're not trained for the kind of delicate work involved in protecting constitutional freedoms, which is what civilian policing needs.
Makes sense. Different training, different mindset.
Exactly. And it was a direct reaction to the post-Civil War Reconstruction era, a clear attempt to stop the military getting involved in civilian life after it had been used pretty heavily to enforce domestic policies, especially in the South.
Okay. So that historical context is key.
It really is. Now, there's a crucial distinction here for what we're talking about today. It primarily applies to federal troops, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines.
Right. Not necessarily state forces.
Correct. But, and this is the kicker, when a state's National Guard gets federalized, meaning the president takes federal control, then they become subject to the Posse Comitatus Act.
And that's exactly what the judge ruled on today in California.
Precisely. That was the issue there.
Okay, so that core idea, military for combat, civilian police for policing, seems pretty clear. But, how does it actually work in practice? Is it a total absolute ban, or does that separation get a bit fuzzy sometimes? Are there exceptions?
Yeah, it's not quite a total airtight prohibition. While it mainly hits federal troops, the courts usually read it to mean prohibiting hands-on policing.
Like making arrests, searching people.
Exactly. Arresting, searching, seizing property, that kind of direct law enforcement action. But it explicitly allows the military to provide things like training or equipment to civilian police forces.
Okay, so support roles are generally okay.
Generally, yes. And Congress also has the power to create specific exceptions. Think major emergencies, like, say, dealing with weapons of mass destruction. So it's not like complete set of handcuffs, but it definitely sets a strong default against direct military policing.
Given that clear intent, though, to limit military power domestically, it seems really important to look at what happens when those lines are crossed, or maybe just blurred. What do the sources say about times in the past when the military maybe overstepped? What happened then?
Well, history shows a pretty consistent pattern, actually. Whenever the military's role gets mixed up with civilian policing, The tools and the mindset that are designed for war, they almost inevitably lead to significant overreach.
Impacting ordinary people's rights.
Absolutely. And often it turns out to be ineffective for the original goal anyway. We've seen this again and again. Think back to the late 19th, early 20th centuries. The military was used to break up labor strikes. Like the 1899 Coeur d'Alene miners' strike in Idaho. Army regulars went house to house, searching, arresting over 1,000 men without any charges. That's a huge violation of civil liberties.
Wow, 1,000 people.
Yeah. Or during World War I, Army intelligence, they conducted something like 6 million investigations, mostly harassing political opponents. And guess how many actual German spies they caught?
I dread to ask.
One.
Just one.
6 million investigations for one spy.
Right. And then in the 1960s, you had military intelligence spying on thousands of suspected radicals, even groups like the ACLU, prominent figures. It's a concerning pattern of government power being misused when military tools are turned inward.
And what about the war on drugs? Did that shift things with Posse Comitatus?
Oh, absolutely. Big time. Congress passed these drug war exceptions back in the 1980s, and that really ramped up the militarization here at home.
And led to problems.
Definitely led to tragic outcomes, like the death of Ezequiel Hernandez in 1997. He was a teenager shot by Marines who were out on a Border Patrol mission related to drugs.
It's awful. It is. And the sources point out military training instills this aggressive spirit, which just doesn't prepare soldiers well for dealing with civilians. We also saw things like uniformed National Guardsmen in California's Campaign program, Campaign Against Marijuana Planting, literally invading private property. Even former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, not exactly a dove, called the military's drug efforts nonsense. He said the problem is overwhelmingly a demand problem, not something the military should be tackling.
So these historical examples really do sound a loud warning bell about blurring those lines. But let's pivot now from those past warnings to the very urgent realities of today, because the border situation, it's being described in really stark terms, driving calls for a totally different approach. What are these modern threats pushing for more military involvement?
Yeah, the statistics being cited are pretty alarming. There's the unchecked growth of Mexican drug cartels, which are being framed as a critical national security threat.
And fentanyl is a huge part of that narrative.
A massive part. Fentanyl trafficking driving those overdose deaths over 100,000 a year since 2021. If you add it up, that's 326,126 deaths just between 2021 and 2023.
Staggering.
It is. And then you have the sheer scale of migration, over 8.5 million border encounters in that same time frame. And within those numbers, concerns about individuals linked to foreign terrorist groups or foreign spying operations.
And there's even mention of China.
Yes. The sources we looked at identify the Chinese Communist Party as, quote, actively funding fentanyl precursors and helping cartels launder money. So, multiple layers of threats being cited here.
So the cartels themselves, they're not just gangs, they're portrayed as a major force.
Yeah.
Almost like a parallel state in some ways. How powerful are they really?
Well, think about this. Mexican cartels are now reportedly the 5th largest employer in Mexico.
Wow, 5th largest employer.
Yeah, between 160,000 and 185,000 members, roughly.
Yeah.
They're using military-grade weapons, advanced tech like drones, jamming system stuff that can rival what some governments have.
So sophisticated operations.
Very sophisticated. And adding to the challenge, cooperation from Mexico has apparently gotten worse. Both the previous and current administrations there are described as allowing cartels, quote, significantly expanded operating freedom.
And the consequence of that, expanded operating freedom for us here.
Well, it means these cartels can operate much more freely, almost with impunity sometimes, right across our border, organizing drug smuggling, human trafficking, building infrastructure, even directly challenging Mexican authorities sometimes. It makes them a really formidable force operating literally on our doorstep, posing a direct threat, many argue, to U.S. national security.
Okay, given that really serious picture, the Heritage Foundation, a well-known conservative think tank, they put forward some pretty forceful options.
Yeah.
What is their report saying the president should be doing?
Right. Heritage argues that the president's power under Article 2 of the Constitution as commander-in-chief to defend U.S. territory isn't actually limited by Posse Comitatus when facing foreign threats. And they classify these cartels as foreign threats.
Okay, so that's their legal justification. What are the actual proposals?
They lay out several options, some quite assertive. First, ISR intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Using military tools like drones, thermal sensors, both at the border and potentially inside Mexico to track cartel movements.
Inside Mexico, that's significant.
Very. Second, counter-cartel drones. using military systems to find and take down cartel drones. Northcom, that's U.S. Northern Command, estimates cartel drones cross into the U.S. over 1,000 times a month.
1,000 times a month. Wow. Okay, what else?
Third, migration enforcement. This means using U.S. military personnel directly to intercept and detain people crossing illegally, and drug smugglers between the official ports of entry.
So soldiers doing the apprehending.
That's the proposal. Fourth, alien detention and transport, using military bases for holding large numbers of people because current ICE detention capacity is only about 41,500 beds, which is way too small for the numbers involved, and using military planes and ships for deportations.
They cite historical precedent for that.
They do. They point to Guantanamo Bay holding large numbers of Haitian and Cuban refugees in the early 90s. And they note the scale of recent removals ICE did, over 142,000 removals and over 62,000 Title 42 expulsions just in fiscal year 2023. Shows the massive logistics involved.
Okay, and the last one.
Yeah.
Sounds like the most extreme.
It is. Presented as a last resort, direct action against cartels in Mexico. This could mean U.S. drone strikes or even special forces operations targeting things like fentanyl labs or cartel jamming equipment inside Mexico, potentially unilaterally if Mexico won't or can't act.
Wow. Okay, those are incredibly assertive ideas. Drone strikes in Mexico using soldiers for arrests. I mean, that seems to run right up against Judge Breyer's warning today about a national police force and those core federalism principles we talked about. How do groups like Heritage square that circle? How do they reconcile these proposals with, well, the spirit of Posse Comitatus?
Well, that's exactly where the real deep debate is, legally and philosophically. Heritage and others making this case, they often push for a different interpretation of the president's constitutional powers. They really lean hard on that Article 2 commander-in-chief authority.
Saying it overrides other concerns in a crisis.
Essentially, yes.
And
Especially when facing what they define explicitly as foreign threats operating on or near U.S. soil. Now, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALE, they offer a useful framework here for understanding this underlying tension. It comes back to federalism.
Okay, and how does ALE talk about federalism in this context? Because we hear federal overreach thrown around a lot.
Right. So ALES defines federalism as being about securing local voices and liberty by having really clear divisions of responsibility between the feds and the states. They actually point back to James Madison, Federalist 45.
What did Madison say?
He argued that federal powers should be few and defined, mostly dealing with external objects like war, foreign policy, while state powers are numerous and indefinite, dealing with the everyday lives, liberties, and properties of the people.
Okay.
So from that perspective, federal overreach is when the national government steps beyond those limited, defined powers into the state's domain. It's about keeping those boundaries clear to protect liberty from too much central power.
Which brings us right back full circle to today's news out of California. The judge's ruling seems to highlight exactly that tension.
Exactly. Judge Breyer's ruling today, September 2nd, finding President Trump did violate Posse Comitatus by federalizing the Guard and sending Marines for immigration raids over the governor's head. His warning about creating a national police force with the president as its chief, that language really hits at the core of this federalism concern. It directly challenges the idea of using federal military power for domestic law enforcement against a state's will.
So for those who argue for a strong executive, especially in what they see as a crisis, what's the counter? How do they respond to rulings like this, or to the general principles of PCA when they feel national security is truly at stake at the border?
Well, advocates for a more muscular executive response, like Heritage or former Attorney General Edwin Meese III, they push back strongly. They argue the president's Article 2 duty to defend the nation's territory shouldn't be hamstrung by judges, especially when dealing with foreign threats.
Meese specifically had issues with judicial review in this area.
Yes. He argued judges are fundamentally ill-equipped to understand the impact of these kinds of decisions on military discipline and effectiveness. Their view, basically, is that in a real national security crisis, and they absolutely frame the border situation that way, the president needs maximum flexibility to act decisively.
And judicial second-guessing could undermine that.
That's the concern, yes, that it could hobble the nation's defense. It really boils down to a fundamental disagreement. Should the judiciary have the power to override a commander-in-chief during what some see as, effectively, an invasion?
And meanwhile, we have the National Guard getting ready for these deployments in almost 20 states.
Yeah.
Their unique status, being both state and federal, how does that complicate this whole federal versus state power struggle?
Oh, it complicates it immensely. The Guard lives in this weird dual status world, right? They're state militias reporting to their governors, but they're also Federal Reserve forces.
Although who's in charge depends.
Exactly. And when they get federalized, like in California or like the plan for these other 19 states, control shifts. It goes from the governor to the president, and poof, they fall under the restrictions of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Which sparks debate.
Huge debate. You see it online, places like Reddit, even among conservatives. Lots of discussion about whether these deployments, even if just for support, are really appropriate. Some worry the soldiers just aren't trained for police work. It could lead to civil rights issues, power struggles between the feds and the states.
But others strongly support it.
Oh, yeah. Others are fully behind it. They want action to clean up crime, deport illegals. They see it as a necessary step because the border challenges are so severe, maybe too much for states to handle alone. It really splits opinion.
Okay, so we've really dug into the history here, the original purpose of the Posse Comitatus Act, those clear warnings from the past about military overreach in domestic affairs.
Clear lines drawn from past mistakes.
But we've also spent time on the very powerful arguments being made today for expanding the military's role, especially at the border, facing these really complex threats, cartels, fentanyl, mass migration.
And that tension really throws a fundamental challenge into sharp relief, doesn't it? How do we as a country effectively protect ourselves against these modern, often transnational threats?
Without sacrificing those core principles, federalism, civilian control over the military, the things meant to protect our freedoms.
Exactly. It's that classic balancing act between security and liberty, order and freedom. And it's playing out right now.
So what does all of this mean for you, listening to this? You're the citizen sort of caught in the middle of these huge forces. In an age where national threats seem to ignore the lines between foreign and domestic, can a law from 147 years ago still do the job? Can it protect both our borders and our liberties? Or are the pressures of today simply too great? Will we be forced to redefine the military's role here at home? Something to think about. Where do you draw that line?